Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome to this today's webinar, Real Multi-Channel with Magnolia, Create Once, Use Everywhere. Thanks for joining us. My name is Ben Price here at Magnolia, and I'm just going to give you a really quick overview of what we'll be covering in today's webinar and a few housekeeping items as well. First of all, you are all muted, but that doesn't mean that you can't ask questions. Feel free to submit your questions throughout the webinar using the GoToWebinar control panel, which you'll see there on your right probably. And we'll do our best to answer all the questions at the end of today's session. 1 or 2 days after the webinar, we'll be posting a video recording of this webinar. So yes, we are recording it, and we will email everybody together with the presentation slides after the webinar. So you'll get all the material you need. After the webinar, you'll also be able to contact either of today's presenters, so their contact details will also be made available. Today's webinar is going to last maximum 60 minutes, I would say, and in today's presentation, I'm very happy to welcome, first of all, Adrian Blum, who is Senior Manager for Online Platforms at NBC. NBC being the largest broadcaster in the Middle East with around 165 million viewers. It's a very impressive number. Adrian has spoken many times at the Magnolia conference here in Switzerland as well. And Adrian used to be an analyst in this space as well. Together with Adrian is Jan Herderke. Jan is Chief Integration Officer at Magnolia, and he's been working with Magnolia's CMS pretty much from the beginning. So today, Adrian is going to give you a bit of context for today's subject, which includes customer experience management, content management, and the multi-channel challenges associated with those areas. And Jan is going to provide you with Magnolia's response and options to solving those challenges. So without further ado, let's get this presentation underway and welcome the first of today's speakers, Adrian. Welcome.
Thank you, Ben. I immediately want to drop in, and of course, to me, the elephant in the room is customer experience management, something that has been talked about extensively, written about extensively. It's a bit of a hype and buzzword kind of thing, which I generally am very averse of. I tend to think that I prefer to solve real world problems with real solutions and just thinking them through and getting to the desired end result. Customer experience management, to me, is very much like this clip art that I dug up somewhere on the web, where sort of the illusion that is created by a system that will allow you to sort of magically, all of those unknown customers, to grab them and paint smiles on their faces as if this is something that is that easy to do. And you can buy a nice pen that does this for you. So I want to go back a little bit to the theory behind this, and I want to emphasize that when I'm talking about customers, this is basically a very broad kind of topic for me. It's not just about e-commerce and where you're actually selling something. It can be about marketing. It's about website visitors, or in my case, in my daily job, it's mostly a television audience that we are trying to get online as well. Now, if I look at this kind of e-commerce experience and the way that people have been looking at this, and this is one of my favorite slides because, first of all, it's a set of two that is very well explaining the actual challenge here. But also, it's from the Harvard Business Review, so it's vaguely impressive, and everybody can just trust that this is really true and well thought through. The classic funnel for marketing is considering that there's many brands out there for any kind of consumer to consider. This goes for television channels, it goes for universities, insurance companies, e-commerce, products you're selling, consumer goods, and so on. And as the consumer is trying to figure out what he wants, the choice is narrowed down to fewer brands, and as the interaction continues, a final choice is made, and the consumer will buy something. So your customer becomes a customer who has bought something. The chief problem with this, of course, is that it sort of assumes that this is the end of it. You've pushed all of these people through your funnel, managed to get them to buy, and then you can just completely forget about them. If this was ever true, It hasn't been true for a while now, because definitely that's not the end of the story. And that's exactly the kind of point that around 2009, 2010, the authors of the article behind this were starting to make. That this is really now about the customer experience journey. It's not a funnel where one decision is made and then you forget about this customer. No, a customer is constantly busy considering, evaluating his choices, making a buy, and then after the buy is actually done, or you get someone to your site, or you get someone interested in your brand, they might enjoy and advocate, they might bond with your brand, and that will lead to further buys, but also to encouraging other people, having conversations around this. And especially in today's digital world, of course, there's a lot of conversation that is entirely outside of your funnel. So if the modern digital marketeer looks at managing customer experience and the customer experience journey, the conversation very quickly turns to having multiple touch points. I think it's one of those things that is made out to be almost as magical as this kind of picture. It's a nice shiny image. Your customer will want to interact with you on multiple platforms, whatever the customer feels like, wherever the customer lives at that time, be it on a laptop, be it on a mobile device, and any other channel you could think of. This customer-centric view, I think, is the most important part, actually. If you're talking about customer experience management, the best lesson you can take from it is to look at this from the point of view of your customer. To the customer, this really is a matter of touching on the same experience in all of these different channels and being able to pick and choose. However, from our point of view, anyone who is trying to actually create an experience like this, it's slightly different. What we have to deal with is actually reaching all of these touch points. And those touch points are by now too many almost to list out. Your content in your message will branch out to social networks, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, whatever you can think of. It is no longer a matter of multi-channel being, as I recall in the early 90s, people discussing this as we have print and we have a website. Later on, as technology progressed, people started talking a little bit more about possible other channels, which were still very much science fiction-like. So let's say mobile would be SMS, maybe it's CD-ROMs. Now, of course, in 2015, there's numerous channels, almost impossible to still keep a complete view of this. If you publish something, it will be found on Google where you don't control the presentation of what's being shown in the search results. It will be shown and shared on Facebook, where it's very hard to control any kind of presentation of what's being shared there. It will be on multiple screen sizes, multiple devices, various qualities of screens, but your tree has to reach all of these areas. To me, that's the modern version of multi-channel. The new hype, of course, is omni-channel, where, yes, you want to add all aspects of the customer journey, not just online, not just in digital, but specifically also in stores, in any kind of display advertising, and so on. I think definitely for the purpose of this talk today, that's reaching a bit far. I think in practice also, it's something that many companies are just not really ready for, because we're still trying to solve the multi-channel problem and actually getting consistent messaging out there. How do you stick out in a forest if you can't see the forest for the trees? Well, of course, the ideal thought is this idyllic picture of this beautiful tree with all of your beautiful content, which is so nicely crafted and so pretty to see that all of your customers, your audience, and your visitors will want to see this, and they will want to see this wherever they can, and it will therefore be the most beautiful tree in this forest. Now, that's all very nice and well, but where, in the case of this particular tree, you notice the nice flowers, and where is that actually coming from? Obviously, this is something that we will have to manage through a single source, and as little diversification as possible, because otherwise it just becomes impossible to reach all of these. Now, the very easy track to fall for is to just focus on those leaves in the tree. Because obviously, if you're trying to reach all of those branches, all of those networks, why not create some beautiful imagery for Instagram, create something that is viral to share on Facebook, create a nice YouTube video clip, and you can go on and on and on and on. And I've noticed that many organizations nowadays are, if not swamped by trying to reach all of these different channels manually, then at least they're swamped by just the mere idea of trying to create beautiful leaves to attach to all of these different branches of where your brand might reach out to. Not only that, but if I'm stretching a tree metaphor even further, I would say the most important thing to remember about a tree is that the roots are actually incredibly important. They're very widespread, and they're not nearly as well organized as that picture that I put up there of the single source tree. Below that source is your own organization, your own back end, your own back office, the people who actually put the content there. And I think this is a nice symbolic picture of how different those concerns are. Yes, you want your tree to blossom, you want it to grow, you want it to be carrying those green leaves and beautiful flowers. But on the other hand, you have your own organizational structure and the different places where information and content is coming from, where you need to gather this, organize it, and somehow get it out there. So if I'm really getting back to the roots, let's do a little bit of history. And of course, when I say a little bit of history, I'm talking about digital history, where, of course, a funny thing happened over the past 20 years where initially people wanted larger and larger screens and smaller phones, and now people want smaller and smaller computers and larger screens on their mobile phones. And there's always various devices vying for our attention. But originally, if I'm talking about digital history, for me, it really started here. And this was a very nice time because websites were simple, web pages were incredibly simple. Basically, everybody was already incredibly impressed if you managed to get a page on there. Getting a page on there was a matter of actually editing HTML. You would more or less know how this would be displayed. There wasn't a lot of option of designing it and doing very different things about this. Of course, throughout the 90s, this very quickly and rapidly evolved, and it became very quickly a commercial concern as well. So creating those pages in HTML was no longer a viable option. And this is where mid-90s, end of 90s, people started using content management systems. Now, I recall distinctly that the definition at the time, if you ask somebody, some expert, what's a content management system? Well, a content management system separates content from design, stores it in a database, and displays it to visitors, which sounds like a nice, succinct kind of definition and explains what a content management system does. However, what it doesn't explain at all is why there were tons of marketeers and salespeople having huge fights with developers and sysadmins, when sysadmins would go, well, listen, we're taking your content, we're putting it in a database and getting it out of the database and putting it on a website. And all of this is really efficient and fast. So what's your exact problem? The actual problem, of course, is, first of all, if I really go back to the roots of the problem, what is content? And content is incredibly difficult to define. I've seen many attempts at this, very brave attempts, but basically content is defined as anything that fits the container. If I would consider a box, then anything in the box is the content. And in many cases, it is that badly defined. It could be images, it could be text, it's very often also audio, video, any kind of binaries, PDFs, whatever you can put in this box. This doesn't look quite as nicely organized as your efficient database where all of the content is stored. And if this is your content, a box of stuff, then what is your actual content management and your collection of content like? Well, probably something like this. Now, fortunately, a digital system doesn't actually look like this. There's no risk of your boss walking into your office and seeing this and thinking, wow, these guys really messed up their content management system. But realistically, in many cases, after a few years of using a CMS, there's a pretty good chance that the reality is close to this. Yes, it's in boxes. Yes, it's semi-organized. It started out with the best of intentions, but here we are. Now, if this is your actual content collection, your repository, so to speak, now what's your actual publishing process? Well, it's a little bit like this. You're dumping your boxes of content into your channels. It's no mistake really that for this picture, I was looking for something nice, like somebody shaking the papers out of a box. And I thought it only just to take a picture where somebody who's working for a shredding company is demonstrating how efficiently they can get rid of all of their content. Because to a very large extent, we can think of this being content management and us in a very organized, clean way getting all of this content in a channel. But to a large extent, we're just throwing it out there. And we're throwing it out in our channels and hoping it ends up somewhere. We're being very happy doing this, and I think we would like to think this is a huge success. Our content is everywhere. It's not actually very well thought through. It's not very structured. We don't really know what it is going to achieve, but it's everywhere. So let's have a big ticker tape parade to celebrate our content being out there. So if you want to do this differently, how do you cope? So cope is a term which was thought out at NPR. I think around 2007 they started talking about this. NPR is National Public Radio in the US. Like many other organizations, they had this kind of problem. Loads of content, loads of channels, new channels coming up. Mobile became a bigger concern at that time. So how do you cope? And of course, this is an acronym for Create Once and Publish Everywhere. Now, this is not NPR's invention. I think it's a nice term for it because it tells you how to cope. I used to refer to it long before cope came on the scene as single sourcing. You want to use that one source and publish it anywhere. It means you don't have to keep recreating all of those different branches. You don't have to keep recreating those leaves. Because managing content is not about blowing leaves around. And this is one of my favorite pictures ever. It's still my analogy for what many people think a CMS is doing. You're using an industrial strength leaf blower. You have a lot of leaves in your trees, and underneath your trees, how do you organize this? You just blow them away. The reality is a little bit more like this guy who's pointing the blower at himself and not looking too intelligent doing it. To me, a content management system really is a tool to help you manage content, which may sound somewhat vague. Maybe it sounds very obvious, but it's something that is very easily forgotten. A content management system doesn't magically solve your problems. A content management system is not your publishing front end. It's not your website. It's not something that defines your processes for you. It doesn't define your content for you. It's a tool. You will have to set it up. You will have to think through how you want it to help you. You will have to think through how it will best help you and which tool will best help you managing content. When I'm talking about leaves and content and shredding pages, etc., don't manage pages. This is something that is very easy to understand for any editor, for anyone really who's thinking of websites. You think about pages, and it still makes me feel we're back in the age of front page, where you would actually manage entire pages, even if it's index pages, even if it's referring to different articles, to different products, you would manage it page by page. Now, this isn't so much managing content, it's just creating pages, as if it's a book that's going to go to the publishers, instead of something that is going to exist online, digital, ever-changing, and appearing in all kinds of different channels. It's a fixed format, a fixed design. There's nothing that's malleable about this. It's not going to show up well. Even worse, many content management systems not only manage pages, but they end up managing blobs of HTML. You have a rich text editor, much like this one, and you're creating rich text. You're adding your pictures in the text. You're adding your bold, your headers, and your links in this text. And what the CMS ends up storing in a repository is a large blob of HTML. And I would say structure this content as much as you can. Use whatever tools your CMS allows you to structure what you're putting out there, because this will make it so much easier to publish it out to very different kinds of presentations, from social networks to mobile, to different mobile applications, to things like Google and search results, syndication, and so on. I don't know if any of you have seen the original movie, The Blob, which is fairly hilarious because the Blob is an alien being that is taking over a town at a pace of about a meter a day, but somehow still manages to devour entire businesses and make complete homes disappear. And therefore, even though it's something entirely different than a blob of HTML, the potential for disaster is almost the same. The speed at which this would happen is also almost the same, because if you've been storing blobs of HTML in your CMS for the past few years, you still may not realize how much of a problem this is going to be for the future. You will eventually, however, run into the blob and get into trouble. So this single source, this picture actually paints it as different colors. Yes, it's coming from the same roots, but you're still very much targeting it to all of these different things. I think that's a slight misrepresentation. It's a nice diagram, it's very colorful, but ideally your structured content, not the blobs, not the pages, but your structured content that you're managing using a tool, which is your CMS, will be coming from the same roots and very much as a single source that allows you to cope. Now, of course, if you look at NPR's original designs, how would you build this? Very helpfully, they put out their diagrams, and their diagrams are not nearly as professional looking as those of a professional marketing organization that is trying to sell you something. It's public radio after all, and I forgive them for using stick figures instead of editors. Now, this content management pipeline, if you take the time to look through it, will demonstrate that there's an enormous amount of software that is custom developed by this organization by themselves. If you want to cope, it's very easy to completely lose track and start focusing, instead of focusing on a customer, going back to focusing on technology and technology solutions and how to build these out. And then only later start going back to what was this originally supposed to achieve. Typically, this was NPR's original design. A few years later, they simplified this into this. I can hardly call this a simplification. And again, the big danger is that if you're trying to do marketing, you're trying to do customer experience management, you're trying to tell your customers something, you're trying to get information across, you're trying to engage and attract an audience. You do not want to get stuck into the details of a tool that is supposed to be there to help you manage content, which then becomes the main goal in itself. It becomes the tool as a goal. Now, as we were preparing this whole presentation, I was joking to Jan, saying, listen, I'll take the easy part. I'll point out what people should be doing on a very high level, and then I'll point out the problems as well. Again, using some nice colorful pictures, And then you get to take the second half, where you, of course, have to demonstrate that Magnolia would be ideal to use in order to solve this problem. So I'm very happy at this stage to get handed over to Jan.
Yeah, thank you, Adrian. So let's see if we can cope. Hello, everybody. And yeah, thank you again for actually nicely summarizing where we are today and how we got there and what the problems we are facing is. Let me turn this around actually and do a very, very quick summary in a bit more dry and technical terms. So what we've got today is the enormous amount of information that we need to handle, and it's always growing. We get more and more sources of that information that we need to actually process and get data from. And after we process and mold and change all that content that we got from the many different sources, we need to actually push it out to many different devices. So that's the technical challenge which we see and which we are trying to deal with. And when I say that we need to process all the data, what we actually need to do is we need to personalize that content to make it targeted to all different audiences. We need to perhaps translate it to different languages because we live in a global world where many people need to or expect their content to get in their languages. And we need to do that with more and more or higher and higher amounts of data and at higher and higher speeds because we want to deliver immediately. So I borrowed this picture from Forrester, which sort of explains or depicts the landscape of the customer experience management space and shows what all the full customer experience is about. There is a part which is the web content management. We already got that part covered because that's the Magnolia's roots, that's where we came from. And over the years, we actually tried to add different integrations, different connectors, different pieces into the puzzle to help build the platform which allow you to actually get your digital experience, to build your full customer experience, your digital business today with Magnolia. How do we do this? Well, with the new version of Magnolia, well, new, it came a couple of years ago with Magnolia 5.0, we took and enhanced the concept which allow you to break the problem domain which you have, the amount of data, all that uncategorized data that are in the box, all that content which fit the box into small chunks, and we allow you to build the apps with Magnolia, apps which you can create in a few seconds, apps where you can configure the extra fields or refine those apps, refine the dialogues in a few minutes, and which allow you to actually make the specialized apps for different types of the content. So you can take everything which is in that one box and put it in many different boxes. You can assign the specialized audience to that. You can have very fine-grained rules and security rules around those things, so the people can actually be allowed or can focus on what is their domain problem, what they can solve, where they can help without having to be afraid that they are touching something they should not. We also allow you to specialize those things. Again, with the apps, different Magnolia apps, what you can do, you can not only display and store the content, which is entered manually by different editors, but you can also pull that content from external apps, or you don't even need to pull it inside of Magnolia. You can just use the apps to display the content which lives elsewhere, which you just want to expose through Magnolia and which you want to allow people to use it. So that's where the apps are helping you. And when I say specialized, there are really many different things which you can do with those apps. You can use them for the translation to get the different language versions of the content. You can use them for managing your tracking information about the visitors. You can use it for ratings, comments, etc. You can build a whole rich experience with a multitude of those apps. And once you start actually using this concept, once you start dissecting this big box of things which you have into different types of the content, you will realize how easy it is then to use Magnolia to build this kind of the boilerplates and to set up the rules for the apps themselves to fill the content as soon as user is looking at something. The example I have here is from the eShop. Well, there it's relatively easy and it's similar to what we were doing for years. You set up the boilerplate, there is some identifier for the content which you're displaying, for the product which you're displaying, and people can be actually looking at it, and all those apps can use the identifier to actually figure out where the data are coming from, what those data are, what they should pull in on the pages, and what they should display. But the concept itself is not limited to the product catalogs in the e-commerce platform. You can use it very easily for the same things in Magnolia, be it news, events, be it the articles. You can use this kind of content apps and the specialized rules to build, say, homepage of the news site where you want to organize the content based on its importance, based on the time decay and all the other rules that you can imagine or you need in your business. It's not just about the catalogs. You can really have the system putting together all the data while you can focus on processing and refining the content itself. Another thing which you can do, and I already hinted at that, is that you can use Magnolia as your single source. You can use Magnolia as the hub in which you can oversee all the content. It doesn't have to necessarily live inside of Magnolia. You can have Magnolia consuming the data from external systems, be it the databases, be it some REST APIs, custom clients, etc. We offer the hooks for this kind of things everywhere, and our app development framework should be flexible enough to allow you to actually build those apps, add them in Magnolia, expose the content to the editors. They don't need to know where it's coming. They can just look at it and put it together when they need it. And to make it easier, we also produce and support a number of different connectors to different systems. We used for a number of years this kind of double funnel diagram to show how Magnolia can help, how Magnolia can be the central of your digital strategy, and how it can help you to process different data, refine them, and then push them to different channels where you want to publish the data. And actually, despite this diagram being a couple of years old, it's more and more true, it's more and more important, it's more and more at the center of our strategy. Magnolia can help you and will help you, will guide you in refining all the data which is coming from elsewhere, pushing the data back to those systems for reinforcement, and then pushing the output to your audience. And I said more than once that you should be integrating different systems, that you should be looking at the connectors which we have, that you should let the other systems process the data, and then you can actually get those processed data through the connectors inside of Magnolia. For last couple of months, we were looking at integrating number of different marketing cloud and CRM tools. So this is what I will use in this example to show how this can actually work and how this works. Despite us integrating different tools, the diagram holds true pretty much for all of them. Some of them don't have one or the other parts, but in general, the picture holds for all those, and it's very similar also for different types of the integration. You will use Magnolia as the content management system. You will use it as a source for feeding the content into different email templates, forms, landing pages, whatever you have. You will use Magnolia also to track the data from the visitor and then post those behavioral data or form data or any other data that you might be collecting on your website into your marketing automation or CRM tools. You will let them consume the data, do their business, running different scoring models, assigning those visitors to different programs, campaigns, or to do any other processing which they might do. And then feeding that data back into Magnolia, we allow you to use it in personalization or via personalization to provide even more targeted content to your audiences. Be it through the landing pages, be it through modifying the content itself, be it through other channels like sending out a newsletter and then reinforcing the traffic coming back to your website. Magnolia can aid you in there all. It can be the single place where you can actually manipulate all that content, all the final vision of the content that you have for your consumers. But hey, so we got all the content in Magnolia or visible through Magnolia. We are able to build the double binding, so to say, between the different systems and send data for processing outside, read through the process data, refine the data, and display them. But with the ever-increasing amount of content, we also need to find it. If we end up with those boxes, which we have somewhere underneath, somewhere in the backyard, we need to know where to find something. Otherwise, well, it doesn't matter that we can store or expose big amounts of data. We need to be able to use them. And for that, again, we have built a number of connectors which can help you. I have this screenshot here, which is a bit blurry, but it will do for what I want to show you, so please bear with me. What I want to show you here is that actually what you can do in Magnolia, you can add the external search index, so you can enable then the faceted search even inside of Magnolia. Despite the app in which you are, it doesn't matter. You can actually search over all the content. You can even see the overview of the results which you have, and in this case you can actually take those, select the results which you want and put them in the editor and use them on a page. Magnolia will know where that content is coming from, it will know how to link that content, and it will allow you to use it wherever, whichever box it is in. It will do all that search for you. How it's done, again, on the back end, it's actually quite simple and straightforward. You have your Magnolia Outdoor instance, you have all your content safely protected, hidden behind the firewall, password protected, all well managed. You just have to install inside of Magnolia the content indexer, which will then crawl through the content based on the rules that you define. It will send it to external search engine. I have a Solr here, but it might be as well Elasticsearch or any other search appliance. It doesn't really matter. And then using the app framework in Magnolia, replacing the default search component, you can use the custom one, which will then connect to this external index and will allow you to search the content which you have there in your backyard. And it will allow you to use that content or place that content into any other app or any other piece of article content, etc., which you are building. And while in this example, I have it as a straightforward loop between Magnolia and the external search engine, not to complicate the matters. What you can also very easily do is you can take those external sources of information which you have, and you can have them contributing to the index of that search engine as well. As long as they provide the information for Magnolia to know how to link back to that content, it doesn't really matter where the content is coming from. So with that, we covered also the searching. We are able to find the content. We are able to find all the information which all our other people or sources of data have contributed to the system, contributed to the pool. But now we need to actually look at the upper part of the funnel, which I was showing before. We need to send that content, distribute it to all the sources, distribute it to all those touch points which the user have. And again, this is something where Magnolia can help. You will actually still use the pages. You will still build pages, be it the landing pages, be it the corporate website, etc. But increasingly, more and more people are actually consuming the data from outside of the web. There are reports which were published recently which show that some groups of people, especially the young people, are actually consuming already more than 60% of data which they receive, more than 60% of content which they read through the specialized applications. Be it the news applications, be it the other specialized apps, doesn't matter. But the trend is clear. There is more and more of the content which is being consumed outside of the websites. And while the websites are still important and people will still come to them and they will still use them, the need to expose the data through different apps, through different frameworks is ever increasing. And this is again something where Magnolia is ready to help you. It already produces and provides you with a number of different endpoints for consuming the data which are stored in Magnolia. Even for data which are not stored in Magnolia, we have APIs which allow you to even get through the cached content, so you don't have to do or go through all the processing again. You can very easily create the other endpoints for the data which are totally outside of Magnolia, like Hero 1, which is used for actually communicating with the beacons, which might be everywhere. They're just hooked to Magnolia as well. Or if you want, you can actually build your own custom endpoints to anything. And it's very simple. I promised originally that I will not show any code and will keep it lined, but I couldn't resist this one. It's just about 15 lines of the code, but if you look at it closely, 10 of those lines is pretty much just a boilerplate, and it's like 5 lines which really matter, which allow you to build the endpoint in Magnolia, to expose data from Magnolia very easily in a format which can be then very lightly, very easily consumed by anybody. Here is the example of how to consume such a content, for example, from a command line. Here is the example of how such a content look like. It's just a normal JSON array. So whether you are consuming it on a web page through some JavaScript framework, be it AngularJS or anything else, or whether you are consuming it from a phone with some REST library on iOS, on Android, or any other operating system that you might be using, or whether you have some completely custom bespoke application internally that will be consuming the data and be delivering it to your users through whatever channels you might choose. It doesn't matter. It's there. It's very easy to consume. It's straightforward. It's clear. And Magnolia can actually provide you that content very easily. So with that, let me summarize very quickly what we talked about and what Magnolia can do for you. It allows you to use the apps to categorize your content and to split the problem domain into small manageable chunks, and allows you to specialize or have specialized audience, have specialized editors or curators of such a content. You can use number of connectors to get the process data from outside. So whatever tool you are using for processing the data, it doesn't matter. Magnolia can for sure talk to it. There is number of things which we provide out of the box. For those where we don't have connectors out of the box, you can use the ones we have as a blueprint to find out how to enable such a communication with whatever you want. And we provide you with number of data manipulation APIs for actually exposing the data to even anything which is not the website. And that's all on top of what we already have and had for years, which is the tools for building web pages, for building the websites, which is the tools for allowing you to cache the different content. Also, the caching was overhauled completely in recent months, so it's now much more faster, it's much better, much more flexible, and allows you to build the sites that perform better, faster, that are able to deal with the higher loads of the data. And whatever you do, remember, we have all those different integrations, be it ours, be it third-party integrations built by our partners, and there is more and more coming, and we are trying to cover that space and make your life easier. So don't hesitate and use them. And that would be all for me.
Okay, thank you guys, thank you Adrian, thank you Jan for your presentations there. Fantastic insights, and we do have some questions coming in, so we can jump straight into those. The first one I have here is on the subject of multi-channel. What is your opinion on designing for the mobile channel first? So we hear about mobile first. What are your opinions on that?
Well, that's something that is a heavily debated topic, and not the least of it within my employer. I think really in broadcast for the past few years we've been talking about second screen as if it's something that is secondary to television, which we would like to think at a broadcaster, but of course it hasn't been true for a long time. Mobile really is the first screen. This is one of the most private and closely kept the objects that people have. So mobile is the first screen. Yes, it should be the first thing you should be designing for. But again, keep in mind that if you're talking about content and getting your message across and achieving your goals, the design is just one aspect of this. And mobile is just one channel. So whilst I completely agree that this is by now definitely the most important channel, and it's quickly getting to the stage where traditional websites on a laptop or a desktop are a thing of the past and something that people look at in offices. it shouldn't be the only part of considering your whole experience.
Okay, Jan, do you want to add anything onto that regarding how Magnolia allows for mobile designs to be easily applied or first applied?
Well, actually, what we allow for is to build the responsive side. So whatever you do with Magnolia, you can also use the modern frameworks such as Bootstrap or others, which allow you to build the sites once and have them usable everywhere, and not only usable, but really nice looking everywhere. But what I was saying before is that more and more for when using mobile as your first screen, you will go for a specialized application. And that's actually where all those REST APIs that Magnolia provides can help you. Either you can expose the content for the website directly through the existing endpoints, or you can build the custom endpoints. And yes, it's definitely something you need to consider while building your website. But it all depends on your audience. As Adrian said, for the audience coming to data producers such as MVC, they will for sure have the custom app. For many of the other audiences where maybe you get smaller amount of people coming, maybe the refresh is not necessary so often, etc., the mobile website is still something that you want to build.
Okay, great. Okay, next question is regarding Magnolia Edition. So everything you were talking about, Jan, towards the end of your presentation there, is this all of possible within Community Edition, or is this just Enterprise Edition?
The REST APIs, yes, they are fully Community Edition. For the connectors, those connectors, we put significant amount of work in them, and it's also significant amount of work to actually maintain them up to date, since the other applications are also changing all the time. So the connectors themselves are actually Enterprise. But the REST APIs, which I was mentioning toward the end, they are Community.
Okay, thank you. Next question. What is the best approach on proxying external content, so from external services, through Magnolia?
That largely depends on how often that external content is changing and what's the amount of that external content. If it changes quite often, and if there is a big amount of that content, what you really want to do is actually retrieve it on the fly, because if you keep caching it or anything, then, well, it would be obsolete by the time you use it. If it's smaller amount of the data, or if it's data which is very difficult to obtain, which takes lots of processing on the other side, then you might want, or you might consider storing them in Magnolia as intermediate stage for the data.
Mm-hmm. Okay. You were talking about content apps earlier, Jan. So if content apps manage content from a single source, are content apps comparable to content pools? What's the difference?
Yeah, well, content pools are more than the content app. So content app is part of what you would consider content pool. Content pool is something, it's not only the storage of the content, it's also about exposing that content and being able to consume that content in the website or from your server. So the content apps are something which defines the structure of that content inside of Magnolia. It's something which is then used by the editors or humans in general to manipulate this content. But what you to build a full content pool, what you also need or would most likely need is the custom endpoint like the one I was showing to expose that data. And maybe a component or two to actually show that in the page. Maybe some rules for exposing or showing that content, selecting that content in the page automatically, etc. But you should have all the building blocks to actually make your own content pool inside of Magnolia already.
Mm-hmm. Adrian, anything you want to add on what we've been saying so far regarding data and content?
Exactly. So listening to Jan, one thing that jumps out to me, Jan is one of the smartest guys I know, but also very much on the developer side in some ways that he talks about all of this, I noticed that he was describing the huge amount of data we have at NBC, for instance. But I never considered this to be data. And again, this is sort of like an old school kind of definition, where I once had a professor explaining to me that there's a huge difference between data and information, because information is when you can actually use data to achieve something. Knowledge is when this information actually reaches somebody and achieves a change. And one weird anecdote, and trust me, I am not lying when I'm saying this. I once worked for an organization that had different departments called the data department, the information department, and the knowledge department. Whenever I get into a meeting with all of these guys, there was an incredible debate going on from the data department saying, without data, we have nothing. Without data, you can't do any of this stuff. The people from the information department saying, well, yes, that's true, but if we don't get it out there and put it into context, then nobody actually is informed by this data of yours. And the people from the knowledge department saying, well, all of this is sort of moot if it's not the right kind of information put to the right kind of people. And in many cases, it's very easy to lose track of that, because yes, you have a ton of data sitting in a database, you have a ton of content in your repository, but if it doesn't actually get out there and to the right people, it's still going to be meaningless. And especially because I was actually hired by the communications department, I was in a constant position of having to explain that all of these guys were needed. We needed the data, the information, but we needed to create knowledge through communication. And again, I'm not making this up. This was an actual case. I was actually in those meetings.
Yeah, I'm sure you're not the only person who can relate to situations like that. Okay, and final question here is perhaps one that you can help answer, Jan, is, so Magnolia is a CMS and also a digital business platform. What is a digital business platform, please?
So Magnolia started as CMS, and it is still CMS. It still can manage your content, but it can do right now much more, especially if you add all those connectors which we have been building to make sure that Magnolia can actually encompass more, that it can allow you to process the data or manipulate the data, react dynamically on the data, that it can allow you to actually use the information that you get from elsewhere to enhance whatever information you have. It's similar to the story which Adrian was saying just a moment ago about the data information and the knowledge. So you get all that content inside of the system, but what you need these days is much more. You need to see what the audience is doing. You need to see, or you need to react to that. You need to reinforce what they are doing. You need to provide them with more targeted content, etc. The digital business experience system or digital business management system is actually much bigger than just the content. You don't just take that content, expose it on the website. You make it more dynamic. You make it more targeted. You make it more suitable for the audience, and you are helping the audience to go through all that content which you have and find what they are looking for. So it's the system, or we allow you with Magnolia and all the other elements that we have, all those connectors which we have built, to put together a system which then can assist your audience much better and can make them more interested in what you have to offer.
Fantastic. Perfectly answered.
Add one thing to that, because well, I think people tend to get too hung up on the terminology, and I'm certainly one of those people, and I love breaking down buzzwords and hype. But at the same time, the real problem is trying to explain what a system can do. In the case of Magnolia, when it's a digital business platform, that's just a way of explaining what else you could do with this kind of system. So rather than trying to find a list with digital business platforms or content management systems or customer experience management systems, or any kind of buzzword of the day or terminology that's attached to this, I would encourage anyone to just really try a system like Magnolia and see what it can do, but also to see what you could use it for in real life scenarios.
Okay, what a great note to end the webinar on. That's all the questions we have. If there are no further ones, then I would like to thank again our presenters, Adrian and Jan, today. And just remind everyone here that we will be sending out emails with links to video recordings, slides, contact details, everything which you will need. So thank you again, everyone. Thank you, Jan. Thank you, Adrian.
Yeah, thank you.
Pleasure.
Okay, great. And enjoy the rest of your days, everyone.